So in this video, we are continuing from the previous video. So we were working in the onUpgrade method. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pass in the onCreate method here. I'm going to pass in my DB, so then it will create my database version, my database for me, because this is where we actually, create that table in our database. Then what we have so far here is the methods that we actually need in order to run our database query. Now, as we've done this, we need to create some methods, right? Or these functions that are going to help us to be able to insert some information into our database. So how do we do this? Well, I'm going to create a method, number one, called AddUser. This method is going to, or this function is going to take in a string and is going to put it inside my table. So let's say, for example, somebody enters their name, it goes inside my table. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a function. So function, I'm going to call it AddUser, right? And function AddUser takes in a string. So I'm just going to pass in a name and then a string. So let's pretend that let's assume that we have an edit text and a button, and when you click on your name, it just adds it to the database. All right. So in order to do that, the first thing that we need to understand is we need to create to write to a database. SQLite OpenHelper gives you the option of using this get write to database or read from database. But in this case, we are writing to the database. So I'm just going to create a DB version, a database version, and I'm going to say this dot writable database, which means I'm going to write to the database. And then my next thing I'm going to do is I need to create a content value. Now, content value is a key and value pair. Now, if you've done SQL before, you see here that when you are inserting into a table, you have to specify the column and then you have to pass in the value. So content values allows us to be able to match a key and value pair where we'll be able to put the name that the person wants to enter into the database into the correct column. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in content. I'm just going to create values equals content values, right? So content values here. And then I'm going to do values dot put, right? And that values dot put, that put takes in a key and a value pair, which basically in our case, our key is going to be the column that we want to put the value. So the column that we want to put the value in is our column dot user full name. Hence why I told us to use variables. If we didn't use variables, it means I have to now keep writing, the username and everything. And then the value that we're going to pass in is the name, right? That's the value that we're going to pass in. The value that we're going to pass in is the name. Now, once we've passed in the name, we now need to execute. Our code. So just in case you're a bit confused or you're trying to understand, what we've done is we're creating a method called AddUser. AddUser is going to take in a name, and then we're going to write to the database, but we need to, match up the value and the key together so that when it goes inside the database, it will know exactly what it's doing. So in my case, what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to, insert it in there. So we're going to use db.insert, right? db.insert, and then that takes in the null, the table name. It takes in the null column hack, which is going to be null, and then we're going to pass in our content value. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in table name, so it knows which table to go. Null column hack, I'm just going to pass in as a null. We're not using that. And then I'm just going to pass in my content values. So when you run this code, what's actually going to happen, in case you're wondering why I keep using semicolon at the end of my code, is because I also write in Java. So I try to get into the habit of still using semicolon just in case I go back to Java and I forget and I get errors and etc. I just practice for myself, but you don't have to, because Kotlin, you don't have to put a semicolon at the end of your code. So now when I've done db.insert, right, if I run this code in my application, it would work, because now I will be able to add a user to my application. So now I have a function called AddUser. At the end of it, I can also put db.close. I can close the database, which is always good practice to always close your database after you've inserted it. But one thing I've realized with using Android Studio is that the minute he adds onto the person, he closes the database, it makes it harder for us to use our app inspection to check our database. So I'm going to ignore that for now, but it's always good practice to put that there just so that we can see when it's added something to our database. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I am going to now create another method, which we're going to now get all of our information or all of our rows in our database and put it onto our screen. Because the next thing I want to do is we want to combine our SQLite with a recycler view. But for the purpose of this tutorial, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to separate both of them. So I'm just going to, in this stage, I'm just going to leave this here. And then in the next video or other videos that we do, we'll look at that. But this method here helps us to be able to, add a user to the database. But what I'm actually going to do is in the next video, I'm going to show you when we add it to the database, if it's going to work or not. So I'll see you in the next video.